On the Anatolian plateau in what is now modern-day Turkey, nomadic tribes of Muslim Turks enjoyed a pastoral existence, breeding livestock, cultivating crops, and following the seasons with their families and their herds. But now their native lands were under siege. Barbaric hordes of Mongol horsemen were advancing from the east. Known for their swift and ruthless raids, these Mongol warriors had created a 13th century empire that stretched from Europe's eastern edge to the Pacific. Threatening on the west were Christian armies from the once great but now weakened Byzantine Empire. With their land and their way of life endangered from two sides, one man emerged as the tribe's leader. His name was Osman. He was tall, with a dark complexion and hazel eyes. He was known as a brilliant rider and swordsman.
He surrounded himself with strong and brave soldiers, reckless men who were superior riders that could fire their arrows on the move. They were skilled in ancient Turkish Anatolian warrior tricks, ambushes, and hit and run tactics.
They used a very powerful short bow, which gave them major military tactical advantage over their enemies.
Contemporary accounts portrayed Osman as a man of the people, a down-to-earth leader. He dressed simply, ate with his men, and shoot his own horses. He ruled from the saddle.
Osman must have been a charismatic individual who combined that with a steady stream of military successes. And as word spread that those who fought with Osman won, more and more people were attracted to his banner.
By the early 1300s, the Mongols withdrew, fearing the growing strength of the Ottomans. Osman then turned his attention to the Byzantines. Osman's enemy to the west, the aging Byzantine Empire, was in turmoil. It was almost 1,000 years old, dating from the year 330 AD, when Constantine moved the capital of the Roman Empire from Rome to Byzantium and renamed the city Constantinople.
The Byzantine Empire had once been very great, but really ever since 1204, when the Knights of the Fourth Crusade occupied Constantinople, it had never recovered from the blow. And the blow it took from that experience allowed conquerors to move in from the east to capitalize on its weakness. And the last of these was the Ottomans.
In the spring of 1302, fate smiled on Osman and his followers. Unusually heavy spring rains in the Saqqara Valley, in what is now northwest Turkey, flooded the valley floor and changed the course of the river. The fortifications along the old riverbed, built by the Byzantines to protect their border, were suddenly out of position and useless. This small act of nature shifted the course of history. It gave Osman and his warriors an opening to attack.
Byzantium was in a very bad way. There was, let us say, a vacuum in northwest Anatolia, a vacuum of power, and into it they went.
Some later accounts of this period by Muslim scholars suggest Osman's raiders were driven by a desire to spread Islam, but more recent studies indicate their motivation was more practical.
Attacking the infidels attracted many Turkish nomad horsemen, very often from among rival Turkish principalities who wanted to fight against the infidel, but also attacking and capturing rich Byzantine towns and more booty and spoil that were distributed among the warriors.
Many of the early Ottomans were Christians. They joined Osman in a common endeavor. And that was an endeavor, I think, in the very earliest stages, to enrich themselves largely by the booty and slaves one got from warfare.
Osman generously shared the spoils of war, and his numbers continued to grow.
The Ottomans were pushing a frontier in the 14th century, and people were very caught up in the like the American West, in the opportunities and the romance of the frontier.
In July of 1302, the Byzantines responded to Osman's raids and counterattacked with a mercenary army. Osman used tactics he had learned from the Mongols. He dispatched a small squad to lure the Byzantines into a deadly ambush. It was this victory that cemented the loyalty of Osman's troops.
If you were a leader, the absolutely most basic thing you had to do is to get a group of fighting men who would be loyal to you, and their loyalty to you would transcend their loyalty to their tribe.
Osman's principality, a small strip of land about the size of Manhattan, was born. By 1307, his fighting force, which began with less than 400 soldiers, numbered over 4,000. His followers became known as osmanlis. Western languages translated the word as Ottomans. Osman's power grew not just from the force of his personality, but also from the belief in his divine right to lead. Osman and his followers were Sufis, members of a mystical sect of Islam that was popular on the frontier because it didn't require praying in mosques or reading from the Quran. Some Sufis worshipped in part through dance. Practitioners were known as whirling dervishes.
Although we call it a dance, it's not really a dance. It's a practice for that individual to forget himself, to get connected with the universe, to feel the universe, to feel the God through that way.
One night, Osman had a puzzling dream. According to a treasured Ottoman legend, he envisioned a tree growing out of his navel. Its branches spread throughout the world. He asked the Sufi sheikh to interpret the vision.
That Sufi sheikh told him that the dream meant that he would be the founder of a huge empire with many peoples under his sovereignty, and that this empire would encompass large territories and would bring much glory to the House of Osman and to Islam.
Osman married the sheikh's daughter. With the birth of their son, Orhan, the great Ottoman dynasty was born. Together, father and son built an army that would dominate its enemies. During the next 20 years, they plundered the surrounding countryside, expanding their territory at the expense of their rivals. Their attack was swift, but their treatment of the vanquished was fair. Unlike other conquering powers of the times, the Ottomans granted religious freedom to Christians in conquered territories. This policy would lay the foundation for the future success of the empire.
I think the most important point to keep in mind about the early Ottomans is that they judged people on what they had to contribute, not ethnicity, not race, not religion. Any of the markers we use today simply don't seem to have been very important.
By the time of his death in 1324, Osman had fathered an enduring dynasty. His son Orhan would build on that legacy, creating a powerful Muslim army that would soon be knocking on Europe's door.